Unmanned sea boats that destroy Russian aviation can now operate over a large area of the Black Sea, but for now the issue is not about total control, but about tactical successes. The strategic task is to liberate the occupied ports and coast, unblock shipping, said the former Deputy Chief of Staff of the Ukrainian Navy, retired Captain First Rank Andriy Ryzhenko on the air of the telethon. He was asked to comment on the statement that the units of unmanned marine systems can control 90% of the Black Sea water area. As the expert explained, it is impossible to talk about control of such an area of the Black Sea yet. Military control involves constant monitoring of the corresponding territory and maximum restrictions on the enemy in its actions. At the same time, the enemy is still blocking civilian shipping, including in the exclusive economic zone of Ukraine. We can guarantee more or less safe shipping only within a small water area that unites the ports of Greater Odessa, the area of Snake Island. Then ships along this corridor go under the protection of the sovereignty of neighboring countries, NATO countries, Ryzhenko said. He praised the fact that unmanned boats can operate over a large territory, where they protect the interests of Ukraine. They can help solve the strategic task of the armed forces of Ukraine, to liberate the occupied Crimea. Our progress in this regard is really very significant. At the beginning of the war in 2022, there was nothing like this. Now we need tactical victories, thanks to these drones, to have operational effects, and for this to help us solve our strategic task, the liberation of sea areas and coasts captured by the enemy, the expert emphasized. Earlier, former Deputy Chief of Staff of the Ukrainian Navy, retired Captain First Rank Andriy Ryzhenko explained that the Ukrainian defense forces do not launch missile strikes against ships of the Russian Black Sea Fleet because the units that the Ukrainian armed forces have in service are not yet capable of hitting a moving target. He explained that the enemy is withdrawing ships from the Novorossiysk base to the Black Sea, including to disperse them, to make it more difficult for the defense forces to use weapons against them. In particular, missiles such as Storm Shadow or Scalp fire at coordinates, at stationary targets.
After years of publicly admiring Vladimir Putin's strong arm, US President Donald Trump has dramatically changed his rhetoric. Over the weekend, he said the Russian president has completely lost his mind. The comment came after another wave of Russian airstrikes on civilian targets in Ukraine, which have become a familiar element of the Kremlin's strategy. But behind the dry facts is the increasingly obvious mental aggravation of Putin himself, writes The Times. According to experts, the root of this madness is the Russian president's isolation during the COVID-19 pandemic. While leaders in most of the world maintained a certain public mode, Putin literally disappeared from the scene. He spent up to 2 years in his residence at Novo-Ogarevo, outside Moscow, avoiding any contact with even the highest officials. The residence was equipped with disinfection tunnels, and visitors, including veterans, had to undergo 2 weeks of isolation before the meeting. All of this limited Putin's communications to a tight circle of security officials led by Nikolai Patrushev, the man who propagated conspiracy theories about a US invasion, animal marriages in Europe, and the evacuation of Western elites to Siberia because of a supervolcano eruption. Psychologists and experts suggest that such isolation, coupled with paranoia and an information vacuum, may have significantly affected the Russian president's sanity. Former Kremlin advisor Gleb Pavlovsky confirms the previous Putin was sensible. Now he is reacting to the pictures in his own head. Political analyst Abbas Galyamov adds, when a person loses self-control, it doesn't end well. The signs of a radical change in Putin's behavior were first publicly noticed by then US Senator and new Secretary of State Marco Rubio back in February 2022 after the invasion of Ukraine. There is something wrong with Putin, he wrote on social media at the time. But while the words sounded like a warning then, today they sound like a diagnosis. Ironically, Putin is a prisoner of the political system he has built around himself for the past 24 years. Like many dictators, he cannot walk away from power and enjoy a quiet retirement, even if he wanted to. He is too attached to and dependent on the mind-boggling wealth and power he has accumulated during his time as a public servant. But even if Putin got to keep his palaces and yachts, there would be no guarantees of safety in retirement. If Putin gave up power, his successor might come after him. Putin's personal authority, charisma and influence would always be a threat to his successor as long as he was alive, a tempting target for the next ruler, and Putin knows it.
Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky has called on Western partners to provide $30 billion by the end of 2025 to help the country expand its weapons production and fight Russia. During a meeting with journalists on Tuesday, Zelensky highlighted the need to boost arms output, which includes missiles, drones, and other key military equipment. The Ukrainian leader said Kyiv must conduct 300 to 500 UAV operations on Russian territory daily and create a reserve of 1,000 drones. That will show the Russians that they will feel the response if our partners help us. This is not an issue of production capacity. It is an issue of funding, he said. We need to fortify our airspace, and that means deploying more drones and expanding our Patriot missile systems. Our skies must be secure if our cities are to remain safe, Zelensky went on saying. Furthermore, he underlined the need for stronger sanctions against Russia, a push for peace talks and allocation of frozen Russian assets to Ukraine. We need this funding, plain and simple. It's not just about military might, it's about ensuring Ukraine's future survival and independence. We cannot afford to wait. We must ramp up production and ensure that we are no longer dependent on foreign supplies for our defense, stated Zelensky. The Ukrainian leader will address G7 countries' leaders over the request for funding. It should be noted that with US shifting its policy over Russia-Ukraine war and reducing aid to Kiev, Ukraine has been increasingly focused on its own resources to fight the war. Russia escalated assaults on Ukraine and launched record number of air raids across the country over the weekend, killing at least 13 civilians. 30 Ukrainians have died and more than 163 others injured as Russia escalated its bombing campaign in the past week.